Hi, and welcome to SPSP's webinar, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. My name is Annie Drinkard, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I'd also like to thank the SPSP Student Committee for putting this program together. We have a really exciting panel ahead for you here. I'll turn it over to Dr. Cynthia Pickett, DePaul University, who is our moderator for this event. Dr. Pickett.
Hey, thank you, Annie. And again, thank you to the SPSP Student Committee for taking the initiative to have this event and bringing all of us together this afternoon to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and how we can implement that at our various institutions. So what I want to do now is introduce our panel of speakers and to let you know, the way we've set it up is that each panelist will take between 7 and 10 minutes presenting on a topic related to DEI and kind of how they approach it in their research or in their institution in their particular role. And then we've left time at the end for Q&A, and we're really interested in hearing from the audience about the questions that you have. And we have some questions that came in already, but everyone, as Annie said, should feel free to use the Q&A function if something comes to mind during any one of our presentations. What we have is a panel that really, kind of goes the spectrum of different roles. So we have Rubi Gonzales, who is a doctoral candidate in psychology at the University of Texas at El Paso. We have Denise Sekaquaptewa, who is, and I looked this up, is the University Diversity and Social Transformation Professor of Psychology at the University of Michigan. Markus Brauer, who's a psychology professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Selena Kohel, who's an assistant professor of psychology at Cottey College, and I hope I'm saying that right. And then I am Cindy Pickett, and I recently moved to DePaul University, where I'm the Associate Provost for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and also in the psychology department there. All right, so the way we had it set up, I'm trying to remember the order, but should I go first? I think I have myself first on this, but I kind of want to go last. Because then I can pick up any topics that don't get covered by the rest of the speakers. So unless that throws people off, can we start with, and I'm trying to pull up my list to see who's going when, and I don't have it. I'm sorry. Let's see, let's start with Markus. Are you first on our list? Or one of you can tell me if you have it.
I can talk. I mean, on the original list, Denise was first.
Okay, so let's go with Denise.
Okay, great. I'm happy to start things off. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, great. Well, yes, as Cindy mentioned, I'm Denise Sekaquaptewa. I've been at the University of Michigan for, I figured out today, 23 years, which is like a time. And I wanted to talk to you today about let's see how I advance that. Some actions that institutions can make really to support these efforts to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion amongst their community. And particularly, I'm going to focus on my time at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. So we've been working on these issues for a long time, and we've been doing different efforts to support diversity in amongst our faculty and graduate students. I'm going to talk today mostly about the Department of Psychology, given that we're all social and personality psychologists. So in the Department of Psychology, I was looking at some current statistics. We're doing pretty well at being about a third faculty of color. Like many psychology departments, we have we are about half women. We are about almost a third ethnic minority graduate students. And we also have a good number of international graduate students. And again, like many psychology departments, we have a lot of female students. How are we getting there to achieve these kinds of numbers? So first, I'll talk about some DEI efforts at the faculty level. And a lot of this is at the university level, and some of it might be more applicable to department. But one of the main things that we've had going at the University of Michigan is the advanced program. And that was initially a project funded through the National Science Foundation for a 5-year run. And then it got, because it was successful, it got taken over by the university and became just part of the budget. So it's just sort of ongoing as part of, is paid for by the university itself. And what it provides is things, it's focused on faculty diversity and success. It provides institutional data, just figuring out where we are right now. How many women do we have? What is the success of people going up through the ranks by looking at them by things like gender and race? So sort of keeping track of comings and goings of different types of faculty. There are workshops to enhance faculty success in teaching and in grant writing and other areas of academic life. And then there's training particularly around hiring of a diverse faculty. So how do you conduct an equitable faculty search? How do you avoid implicit bias in review of applications for faculty? And that's been a major part of the advanced program. We also have a program called Next Prof, which is primarily focused on STEM, and here STEM includes neuroscience. And that's a program designed to invite scholars of color who are in the last stages of their graduate career. So they're getting ready to go on the job market, and they come to Michigan and learn about, they again, engage in workshops about what to expect on the job market, what to expect as an assistant professor, designed to enhance success, but also to kind of introduce them to Michigan and get them to apply to our job openings in an attempt to bring them here. Like many universities, we have a collegiate fellow program, presidential postdocs, and these are programs designed to bring in people at the postdoc level. So they do approximately a 2-year postdoc with the goal of them transitioning to the tenure track job here at Michigan at the end of their postdoc period. And that's been a really successful program to bring people who are committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion to join our faculty. In the last 5 years, we've introduced the University Diversity and Social Transformation Professorships, the goal being to bring in 20 such people over the next 5 years. By bring in, I mean, some of them are here already, like me. I was awarded that professorship last year, and some people are brought in externally. And the idea is, again, to bring in faculty members who are excelling in their commitment to DEI, either in terms of research, service, and or teaching. And these are all things that are intended to sort of improve the climate for diversity here amongst our faculty. Finally, we have these DEI leadership positions, including someone named as our Chief Diversity Officer for the university. We have an Associate Dean who's in charge of all things DEI in the college. And then we, in our own department, we have an Associate Chair whose purview is entirely focused on issues surrounding DEI. And the folks right now who are in these positions are our Chief Diversity Officer, Rob Sellers, Associate Dean for DEI, Fiona Lee, and Associate Chair for DEI, Elizabeth Kohel, all of which are people of color, but they're also social and personality psychologists. In terms of DEI efforts for graduate students, we have a lot going on here too, focused on the themes of recruitment, retention, and then climate and success. So for recruitment, we've been running a long-standing diversity recruitment weekend. And you might have heard of this at other universities as well, but it's bringing in potential graduate students of color to come visit the University of Michigan, stay for the weekend, have workshops on how to have a strong graduate application, get to meet some faculty. Again, the goal is to not only try to recruit them to apply and come to Michigan, but also to increase the pipeline. That is, that it may benefit them to enhance their chances of being admitted to graduate programs anywhere. So that's been ongoing for many years here at Michigan. In terms of retention, we run graduate student organizations. including Asian American psych students, Black psych students, Latina Student Psych Association. Psych Out is a more recent one. And then there's a broad Students of Color of Rackham, which is just a broad across the university graduate student organization. And these are all very active groups, and they're funded, in this case by the Rackham Graduate School, to be able to support their programming and support their cohesion as communities on campus. In terms of climate and success, all of those graduate student organizations I mentioned within psychology have representatives who serve on the Departmental Diversity Committee. So the Departmental Diversity Committee consists of faculty, grad students, and staff members. So it really includes members from all of these constituencies in our department. We recognize graduate students with Diversity Research and Service Awards. So these are things that highlight excellence in DEI related research, and also recognizes and rewards students for the great amount of service that many of them do in terms of supporting our efforts to enhance DEI in the department. And then finally, we run a diversity research colloquium in which we bring in an eminent speaker, an external speaker, to our department to give a research colloquium, meet members of the department, have lunch with graduate students in an effort to highlight the value of DEI-related research. Why do I think these things work? Well, I think key elements of why these things are working for us are the participation of the majority of department members. That is, I think it's a bad idea for people to say, okay, there's a couple of people here in our department who are committed to DEI, so we're going to let them handle it and let them run the show regarding DEI. I've always said DEI is everybody's issue. It affects all of us here in our community, so everyone needs to be involved. I think another important thing is that our DEI efforts amongst faculty and students are recognized and rewarded. They're part of annual reviews, for example. One thing we do have is resources, and I think that comes from support from leadership. We have people who are higher up and are willing to give us the funds to be able to support the things that we want to do regarding DEI, and that's critical to success. Of course, there are still remaining challenges. I can just put out there that we've made advancements in recruitment and retention of diverse faculty and graduate students, but we've made less progress in terms of climate. And I think that's a really difficult issue that we still have to face and overcome. And then finally, we have these external societal things we have to deal with, like the recent executive order, which bans federal contractors from doing many of the DEI efforts that we've been working so hard to promote, to facilitate our efforts to support DEI on our campuses. So I'll leave it there, and thank you all for listening.
Great, thank you, Denise. And everyone will have, again, a chance to ask questions for the group as a whole or to individual panelists. So if you do have questions, you can go ahead and start putting them in the Q&A whenever they come to mind. But now we have, after Denise, Markus Brauer, who will present on some work he's been doing.
Thank you very much. So let me immediately share my screen. Can you see this? Yes. Okay, there are many things you can do in your daily life as a student, as a graduate student, but I'm going to talk mostly today about committee work, what you can do in terms of university committees, and also maybe the department climate committee. And I think that especially graduate students can play an enormous role there. And one is the two things they can promote in these committees is one's a systematic approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the second is talking about DEI initiatives that actually work and are effective. So here are some university committees that I was a member of in the last 10 years. And all of these committees included graduate students. There was one committee that wrote the university's diversity plan, the framework for the next 10 years of what's done in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Then I was part with several grad students and colleagues of the campus climate survey, so that 8,000 students completed that, and we both designed the survey before and then analyzed the data afterwards. And then I'm a member of the undergraduate teaching committee, and one of the key initiatives here has been to promote inclusive teaching practices on campus. I'm also part of the departmental climate committee. We have done many things. I can't even list all the things that are listed here. You can read the list yourself, and actually one of the problems that sometimes occurred is that there are so many things to do, and the question is, it's sometimes difficult to decide what to prioritize. And actually, together with my graduate student, Mitchell Campbell, I recently published an article where we tried to propose a systematic approach to actually choosing what initiatives should be focused on and what should be coming first. So one of the key ideas in this paper is that anything related to diversity, inclusion, and equity, it actually is a behavior change issue. What we really want people is to change their behaviors. So then you can ask the question, so how do people in other domains go about changing behavior, public health, sustainability, saving for retirement, et cetera? And the key idea is that actually everybody who wants to change other people's behaviors should ask themselves three questions. What is the target behavior? What actually do we want people to do? Who's the target audience? Whose behaviors do we want to change? And then what are the motivators that I can use in my initiative? And in case you're wondering, all of this information is available on this link that I provided below. And then I also provided the reference again here. So question number one, what is your target behavior? What actually should we be targeting? Should we be focusing, promoting non-discriminatory behavior? Is the key inclusive behaviors? Where do these behaviors occur? Do they occur in the classroom? Do they occur in graduate students, social events, etc.? So how do you find out? Well, you ask the people who are concerned by that. And you can imagine structured interviews, focus groups, climate surveys. And the goal here is to find out actually from the students belonging to underrepresented groups, what is it? What makes them feel excluded? What are the behaviors that hurt their feelings? What are the behaviors that are offensive? And then on the other hand, what are the behaviors that signal respect to them? And last time they felt included, what actually happened? What did the other person say or do to make them feel included? And then what usually happens is you end up with a whole bunch of potential behaviors that you might want to target. And you don't want to just target all the behaviors in one initiative, because that's undifferentiated marketing, and that's usually quite ineffective. So usually what we do is we then go ahead and make a list of these potential behaviors that you might want to target, and then we evaluate them with regard to impact, probability, and what we call market opportunity. So which are the behaviors that are going to have the biggest impact? Which is the behavior that are people most likely to adopt? Is it a behavior that's easy to change? And then finally, market opportunity. Is it the case that not yet many people are engaging in this behavior? Target audience, same thing. Who actually should we be focusing on? Is the problem instructors? Is it the peers? Is it academic staff? Is it the more advanced students? And then even within these groups, the question is, should we more focus on the people in the middle, the movable middle, or should we be focusing on individuals with the most negative attitudes? Here again, focus groups, climate surveys can provide interesting answers. And then just like before, usually after that process, you end up with a whole list of potential target audiences. These are all segments of the population, and it could be the student population. And then the question is, which one should we be focusing our initiative on? And here the criteria often size. We like bigger segments. We like a segment that's ready to change their behavior. And what is really good is if there are pre-established communication channels that allow us to reach these segments, and that's meant by reachability. And then the next thing is to find out, well, what are the barriers? How come the members of my target audience are currently not yet engaging in the behavior that I want them to engage in? Are there structural barriers, lack of opportunities, or is there lack of knowledge, like what the offensive behaviors are, or how you talk to a person belonging to different social groups, etc.? What prevents the members of my target audience from engaging in the behaviors that I want them to engage in. And then what are the benefits that I might highlight? What could people derive from engaging in these inclusive, non-discriminatory behaviors that I want them to engage in? And again, focus groups, structured interviews, and climate surveys will provide the answer. So moving to sort of the second topic, the other thing that you can do besides proposing a very systematic approach to behavior change in the diversity domain is promoting initiatives that have been tested and that have been shown to be effective. And there is now a vast literature on what works and what doesn't work. Here's the most recent one that I'm aware of, Betsy Paluch's chapter in the annual review of psychology. And if you read that chapter, you actually see a number of interesting things. For instance, here, I just want to put some quotes out here. Well, there are recent reviews and they have not reported results that justify the widespread enthusiasm for implicit bias interventions. Neither does our current investigation. In that field of research, we find symptoms of publication bias, and then the authors conclude, well, together with the lack of evidence for diversity training, these studies do not justify the enthusiasm with which implicit prejudice reduction trainings have been received in the world. And I put the page number on there. So there are now more and more articles. Here's Tiffany Green. She is a colleague here at the School of Public Medicine. She recently published an article in Scientific American, The Problem with Implicit Bias Training. Well, here you have the answer. There's little evidence that it leads to meaningful changes in behavior. Here are a number of headlines that sort of reflect the same idea. So the question is that the right way to go for the university, is to implement something for which there's very little scientific evidence? Why not do something that is effective? So, and I'm shamelessly promoting my own research. Here's a paper that we published recently. Suhad Murar and Mitchell Campbell are both my graduate students. Suhad is my former graduate student. Published that in Nature Human Behaviors, norm-based approaches where we try to affect people's perceptions of social norms and then actually do find drastic changes in behaviors. Of course, I'm not the only one. Other people have proposed initiatives that are likely to lead to behavior change. And then again, the chapter by Betsy Paluch is full of great ideas. So the suggestion would be, let's promote diversity initiatives that have been tested and that have been shown to be effective. I want to come to the last two slides that I have here. The graduate students in our department sort of said, yes, we really have to know what the issues are and what we should be working on. And the best way to do that is to design a climate survey and to then have the graduate students in the department complete this climate survey. So the survey that was developed in our department was developed by our graduate students. There was some help from diversity researchers, but it was their decision and they developed this survey. I personally think it's a great survey that tackles all of the most important issues. I asked the graduate student if I could share it with you, and they say, yes, you can find a link, you can see a link to that climate survey. I also provided the QR code. And then if you click on that link or use the QR code, you get to this website. It happens to be my lab's website. And in the first part on interventions, you have climate surveys, and you see here on the top chapter, you see that you can download the departmental climate survey. It's a QSF file which can be imported directly into Qualtrics. And then there are also instructions on how to do that. And I think by Monday at the very latest, we will provide you with an R script on how to clean the data and then how to analyze the data. What that means is there's virtually no work to be done, both designing the survey and then analyzing the data. And I'm currently trying to find a system. Is it possible to give people feedback of how they compare to other university departments by sort of benchmarking? It's a benchmarking idea where you could then share with me your mean values, maybe even anonymously, and then we would provide you with information on how your department compares to other departments in the country. Again, the QR code is here on the left. I better stop here. I'm excited to answer your questions. Thank you very much for your interest in this. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Markus. All right, let's go on and have Selena talk about her work that she does. So this is Selena Kohel.
Hi, thank you for coming. I am at a small liberal arts college, so I'm at a very different institution than Denise and Markus are at. So just so you have that particular context. And I'm a little nervous and I'm having trouble getting my slides up. Okay, there we go. So to provide a framework, so I am primarily going to be talking about my teaching and my service at my school. I have a 4-4 course load, and so each of those courses is unique, which leaves very little time to do research except over the summer. And so when for the DEI work that I do, I approach it from different levels. So at the individual level, the interpersonal and the institutional. And then I also focus on different constituencies depending. So in the classroom, I'm focusing on my students. I also do some teaching brown bags with faculty colleagues. And then in my service work, I focus on staff for the institution as a whole. And then I differ in terms of am I wanting to have more awareness or knowledge or skills. So what do I want to occur because of the work that I do? And I put this up here because I think it's important. Sometimes we might focus in on a particular level or constituency or goal, and we might find ourselves hitting a wall or feeling like we're at a standstill. And so there are many avenues by which we can do this work. And so I put this up here just as a reminder that there are different ways to affect change. Okay, so just so you know, these are my particular goals in the work that I do. So I am very focused on perspective taking and the research that has said that perspective taking can lead to changes in attitudes and behaviors. And so really through the work that I do, I'm hoping to either increase awareness and knowledge that different life experiences exist and therefore might lead to different perspectives, to increase awareness and knowledge of who's included and who's not. And that could either mean who's not included or who's excluded, who's purposely, intentionally excluded. And then to increase skill development in how to be inclusive and taking into account, though, issues of equality and equity. So there's inclusion, everybody belongs, and then there's inclusion, we need to right past wrongs in terms of the social inequalities that exist amongst groups. So that's my framework. And so on the individual front, this takes place within my classes. This is where I'm trying to just raise awareness and knowledge of differences in the first place, not really necessarily change actions as much. And so I have the great fortune to be able to take students to on field trips. We have the funding for that. And my school is in Missouri, and so we're close to Arkansas and we're close to Kansas. And so I've gotten to take them to places like the Little Rock Central High School National Historic Site and the Brown versus Board of Education Museum. So those are monuments to our history in the United States regarding school desegregation and race relations. And so they're able to see and learn more and hear the voices of those who were involved in those times in history and how that has repercussions for today. I also, when I can't do field trips, I have asked my students to do scavenger hunts of my institution. So looking at the different buildings, looking at what's posted, looking at in essence, who's included and who's not. So I use a model, it's from the University of Michigan actually, where we look at the social identity wheel and we look at different racial groups, ethnic groups, national groups, socioeconomic status, sexual identity, gender identity, and we look which of the subgroups are included and which aren't. And let's give our school a grade. Let's give our college a grade, and let's come up with psychological interventions to lead to greater inclusion. So those are some things that I do within my classes that are to engage others in this work and raise their awareness and knowledge. On the interpersonal level, so here's where I'm really trying to change behaviors in addition to thoughts and feelings. My school is unique in that we have a fund where each second year student in good standing gets to participate on an international experience. And the school organizes what they used to call a main trip, the main international trip, and it was always to a European location. And so there were a number of faculty, self-included, who decided, well, the way that trip is structured and the location where that trip takes place doesn't seem to focus enough on cultural differences and similarities. And so my mom is from Thailand, and so I proposed a trip to Thailand and then coordinated it and offered it, and really focused on having an awareness of cultural similarities and differences, knowledge of what those differences are, and helping students prepare by practicing engaging in a different way of being than they were most likely used to before we went on the trip. And so that Not everybody can have funds to take your students to Thailand for short-term study abroad, but perhaps you could recreate a somewhat similar experience on your home campus. I also have co-coordinated a Teaching Brown Bag series at my campus, and I've tried to help my colleagues to raise their awareness and knowledge and ability to navigate bridge differences in the classroom. And so one Teaching Brown Bag had to do with mapping, bridging, and integrating cultural differences. We talked about things like individual collectivism, indirect, direct communication, high context, low context, monochronic and polychronic orientations toward time. And then I also presented my research on microaggressions. So I surveyed our students, our international students, our domestic students, our students of color, our white students, in terms of the frequency and the intensity of the responses that they had regarding microaggressions on campus. And I presented that to my colleagues for them to try to counter those effects. For the student experiences I've talked about, I was able to assess those, and it does seem like there was a change in awareness, knowledge, and behaviors. For the Teaching Brown Bags, I don't know, right? So the research talks about one-off diversity, equity, and inclusion events, and they're not very successful. And so I can only hope that they were successful, but I don't actually know because I haven't followed up. So that's something that I could have done and should have done. On an institutional level, in the service commitments I had, so this is trying to change policy and practice. So that international trip that was primarily focused on a European location, I was able to, when I came onto the board, to problematize that and to, instead of the trip being more for entertainment value, which is what it seemed like it was, to have it be on, okay, so if our objective is for students to respect diversity, how does a module of riding a bike in the countryside in Italy meet that? And so I was able to change the criteria for picking modules, not necessarily locations, but picking modules so that they were more focused on the educational aspect and not the entertainment aspect. I also, through providing perspective, was able to, with a colleague, to get the name changed. So the European trip had been called the international trip, and the other trips had been called alternate trips. And so it took a lot of talking and it took a number of years, but I was able to, I think, get across the message that by calling one the main trip and others alternative trips, and those other trips just happened to be to countries in Asia, Africa, and South America, you're marginalizing, you're othering those trips and those with ancestry in those countries. And so now all of those trips are called International Experience, the name of the country. I was also, there were also things I tried to do to have it more focused on culture that didn't work as much. In my last slide, we'll talk about some of the challenges I've had in this work. I was also on the diversity committee. I did a campus climate survey. The president asked to see it. So I talked with her about the results, but nothing came of it. Other than that, I have coordinated the development of a Cottey Cares card, which is a daisy, that's our school symbol. And it has the 10 social identities that I talked about earlier in the scavenger hunt on it, and it talks about how Cottey is inclusive of those identities so that we recognize all of those identities. Whether that's successful or not, whether it's performative, I don't know. So, so there's an uncertainty around that too. I also developed an ongoing series, a diversity, equity, inclusion train the trainer series. And the intention was for faculty, staff, and students who participated to then be able to go about and train others. And I recruited enough people, and then 3 people bowed out and I couldn't do it. And so that was a challenge as well, because one person couldn't make all of the sessions and didn't grasp that it was developmental in nature and it was about building group cohesiveness and practicing being equitable and inclusive. And so they didn't want to be a part of it. And then their friends decided they didn't want to be a part of it either. And so I wasn't able to do it. And so that's a challenge in doing this work, which I mentioned on this slide. And then this is my last slide. So my takeaways from all my different approaches in this work is be persistent, approach topics from different angles. And I think the last 2 are the most important for me. So meet people where they're at. Maybe they're at the awareness, maybe they don't have the awareness yet. So they need that awareness to know that this is even a topic to be discussed. Maybe they don't have the skills. Maybe the campus climate survey didn't go any place beyond me talking with the president because she didn't know what to do with it. So try to meet people where they're at, and then try to help them understand why it's important to them. Like Denise said earlier, DEI is everybody's business. this is help them to understand why it's important to them, instead of us saying to them, this is important to you because of, this should be important to you because of this. And then I also talked about the importance of evaluating to know if the interventions are even working. And I want to really emphasize number 4, also take care of yourself, because this is hard work. We're trying to disrupt ways of being that have been embedded in people over many, many, many years. And so you need to make sure that you're taking care of yourself so that you can continue on as well in doing this work. So this is my contact information if you have any questions, and that is all I have.
Great, thank you, Selena. That was great. All right, so next we have Rubi Gonzales, who's a doctoral candidate at the University of Texas at El Paso, and give us a student perspective on doing DEI work. And are you sharing your screen?
Thank you for your patience. My name is Rubi Gonzales. I am a doctoral candidate in psychology at the University of Texas at El Paso. My pronouns are she, her, and ella, and I'm coming with a graduate perspective. So just a brief outline, I wanted to first contextualize what it means to, when we talk about DEI, and introduce a couple of terms. Let's see. And also provide you all tangible action items and give you specific examples of what can be done and what shouldn't be done. I think sometimes the best way to learn something is to learn what not to do, and I think that gives us a lot of valuable knowledge as well. I also wasn't sure who all was going to be attending this webinar and at what level of knowledge folks were going to have. So I wanted to provide a quick framework as to when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, when we talk about DEI, we really have to talk about the people who have the power and the privilege, and how the academy is a system of inequality that we all engage in perpetuating, including myself, in one way or the other. So when we talk about engaging in DEI, it essentially means to disrupt the system of the academy, because the academy was never meant for many of us. It was not meant for me. And it was really only meant for white men. So it's not going to be easy to disrupt a system. It's not going to be comfortable, and it's not going to be clean and tidy. And so when we have that fundamental understanding, we can talk about what it actually means to engage in DEI. So I wanted to open up with this quote by Dr. Love. They describe the difference between allies and co-conspirator. And I really like it because she differentiates between allies, knowing the language, reading all the books, and they come to the meeting with all the terms. And a co-conspirator puts something on the line, takes a risk, small or big, and uses their privilege. Oh. I'm not sure if y'all can see that really well on your end. So I also wanted to provide a quick couple of illustrations of what authentic allyship looks like and what performative allyship looks like. I circled a few where I've seen in the past few months this year that I think are really important to be mindful of. And so when we engage in DEI, we have to kind of check ourselves, myself included. It's an ongoing process of educating ourselves and also unlearning several things and keeping that in mind as we go on. So a few tangible action items. I'm going to go over 4 tangible action items, taking an ecological approach. So at the system level, many institutions and departments and organizations released a statement after George Floyd was killed, but what action has happened since then? This is the time where you can speak up in your department, your college, or your university, or organizations in which you're a member of. Go back to the letter. Did they outline specific steps that they're going to take? Did they keep the language very broad? Did they even release a letter? Either way, you can hold them accountable. Are you a part of a listserv in which your department organization can pick back up the conversation? Perhaps sending an article that you come across on DEI or anti-Blackness, and sending that to your department, to the university, taking action in that manner. Also, there's several events, such as these virtual events that are free and open for everybody. And so perhaps just sending a link, forward an email along to your department, and let people know there's still things that still need to be taken care of. And so that can be one way to keep the momentum going. You don't have to reinvent the wheel like other panelists have mentioned. People are doing the work. And so at the course level, many people teach courses or co-instruct So how do you design your course? Are you diversifying your syllabi and your curriculum? Are you including different scholars with different identities? And you can do this for any course. It doesn't have to be just for social psychology or cultural psychology. And it doesn't have to be just for one chapter. It can be embedded. We can do this for when we talk about stats. We provide context on how quantifying things in psychology is a colonial practice. Many times people don't really talk about qualitative methodologies or do not get full credit as a methodology. And why does quantifying have to validate the experiences that participants in qualitative research have already shared? In addition, when we talk about theories and theorists, you contextualize that to students. The main theories and theorists in psychology continue to be white folks. So can we talk about how that impacts the direction of the field and what other theories can we use from other disciplines? Also, what can we do in the lab? Labs hold weekly meetings or bi-weekly meetings. Can your lab have regular conversations on DEI, bring in an article to discuss and learn as a group, while keeping in mind that it does not have to be relevant to the lab research or be empirical? This idea that it can only be empirical or that people who only hold PhDs are the people who have knowledge is inaccurate. I think we can learn from a lot of people. Lastly, how are you interacting with students? Is there flexibility in your online course that you're teaching this semester or next semester as we go through a pandemic and ongoing racism in the country? Are you acknowledging that times are not normal? And so how can we proceed and manage our class in a way that keeps that in mind? Things are not normal. So how we engage with students in the classroom and the labs shouldn't be normal as well. We should offer that flexibility. When we take these things in consideration, we're being more equitable. Students may not vocalize this. They may not vocalize that they're struggling. And then also for those who teach graduate students or are mentoring graduate students, are you still expecting them to perform at the same level as if everything else is normal? Is there space to talk about psychological barriers and personal matters that are impacting students? And how else can you help graduate students? If they don't bring it up, could you bring it up and kind of normalize that conversation and share your personal struggles to initiate that conversation? So like I mentioned, learning what you do is sometimes, learning what not to do is sometimes more important than learning what to do. And I think this meme really reflects about how I feel as I reflected on some things that have happened, maybe just in the past few months. So listen to people who are being oppressed. Don't say you're open to learning and continue to engage in a violent manner. So redirecting the conversation to like, oh, well, what about this other group or this other organization? They're not doing X, Y, and Z, or they're doing it this way. Don't gaslight students who are oppressed or faculty who are being oppressed in their experiences. So saying that, you know, Dr. So-and-so is really nice and is really great at mentoring. They really care about students. They didn't mean to do X, Y, and Z, meaning that they couldn't be racist when that's absolutely not true. Don't say that maybe you can speak up and whenever you're tenured or have a PhD, paternalistic and so forth. Racial gaslighting can sound like this. I think these are very, very explicit. I think there's some more subtle ones as well. And so what does tone policing look like? This has happened a lot in the past few months as to how people should communicate to the oppressors. So that means it's a set of tools that is used by people holding privilege and power to prevent marginalized individuals or groups from sharing their experiences of oppression, and it's a silencing tactic. So just keeping that in mind. Next, I think we all have the ability to speak up, and we can speak up on listservs that we're members of, in meetings, in virtual sessions. If you see or hear or read that someone's being treated in an unequitable manner, speak up. Don't try to professionalize how someone who is being oppressed communicates to the oppressors. For example, in one listserv, one person spoke up about their experiences with leadership, and the leadership attacked this person publicly on a listserv. And I want to share that no faculty spoke up. It was just graduate students who spoke up. And after graduate students spoke up, the president of this organization provided these outlines as to how we should now carry ourselves on the listserv. And again, this is a strategy to those who are being oppressed to maintain the power and to silence the voices. There's a lot of great information on social media. Twitter and Instagram are great for this. To learn more about DEI, to learn more about what are people's experiences who are being oppressed in the academy and outside of the academy. And if you are going to use social media, don't try to creep up on students or professors and use it against them. That's been something that's happened quite a bit. It happened to me personally. I know several colleagues in which that happened as well. So just being mindful of that. Also amplifying the voices of marginalized folks. Do make efforts to include diverse speakers and researchers. Don't set up stipulations as to what kind of speakers or style of speakers are appropriate for a conference session, university department colloquium, and don't invite them for after they've been invited. I wish I could make that up, but that's accurate. I mean, that's a true event that's actually been happening this summer. So just keeping that in mind. Also, when we talk about diverse speakers, make sure that you do compensate them for their time. And so just some final thoughts is that no amount of degrees or titles will protect those who continue to be oppressed inside and outside of the academy. So if you see something, do something. I wanted to share a quick anecdote that a few years ago, there was a conference and the theme was cultural competence. During the Q&A session, there was a white man who engaged in a very racist and sexist manner towards the keynote speaker, who was an officer of DEI at an institution. And in a room over 100 people, no one said anything after she was being attacked publicly. And this was after we had all learned about how to be an active bystander for implicit bias. I later find out that people were afraid for their careers because this was somebody who was very powerful within that discipline. And so I go back to my beginning slides to versus ally versus co-conspirator. And are you going to take that risk to stand up for somebody and protect them? Here's a few resources. And so Dr. Love, this is the full clip of the quote, if you want to check that out. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ruby. And thank you very much for sharing kind of these real experiences that you've had and offering that advice. And I know we've got questions that are coming in, so that's great. And I'm just going to present briefly, and then we'll go and move on to the Q&A. So let me see if I can share my slide. Hold on one second. All right. I should be faster at this, but I'm not. All right. So as I sort of mentioned at the beginning, right now as Associate Provost, my full-time job is doing DEI work for the university, particularly as it relates to faculty. So I'm in academic affairs, working in the Provost's office. And, you know, and the reason I transitioned into this role is that I really wanted to see change and really wanted to devote myself more fully to how we can, you know, change academia, change the system from within. So a lot of the things that Ruby was talking about, how it's structurally set up in ways that disadvantage certain groups. And academia as an enterprise is very conservative and meaning that it's resistant to change. And you have a lot of people in academia who feel very strongly that the ways of doing things, the incentive structures, are how they should be. All right, so for people who are watching this now, we're probably speaking to the choir here, in that many of you are involved in this work, or you hope to be involved in it. And so what I wanted to do is just give my perspective as someone who, and I'm looking at struggle, did I spell that right? my perspective as someone who has been doing this work for many years, and some of the issues that come up, the issues that I face on a daily basis, and how I have been able to deal with them. And in some cases, you know, in all cases, really learn from them. And so I'm just going to try to go through some of those, and hopefully there's some advice in there that you might feel is helpful in terms of work that you're doing and the struggles that you might face as you try to do this in your home institutions. All right, so some of the common roadblocks that I experience, and I should say that even in the most, you know, I would say that these roadblocks exist even in places that are pretty progressive. In progressive towns and progressive universities, there are still these roadblocks that exist, in part because I think people have this idea or this ideal of diversity and equity and inclusion. But I don't think that many people have really thought through what does it mean to implement that. So right now I'm reading Kendi's book on how to be an anti-racist, and I really take an anti-racism view of how to approach DEI, in the sense that if you look at the policies and the structures that are in place, many of them either are creating racial equity or they're creating racial inequity. And I would say a lot of them are creating racial inequity. So how do we change that? How do we actually proactively create a system that enhances racial equity? And so that's going to require change, right? It's going to require changing policies, changing how we do things, changing the structure of rewards. And that can be very, very difficult. But one of the things that that's always there is, well, how do you convince colleagues that diversity matters? So most of my presentations begin with something along the lines of, here's what diversity can bring to an organization. Right, it brings in different perspectives, you have more creativity, different ways of solving problems. And so that usually resonates, this idea that, okay, well, I can see how having multiple perspectives could lead to better solutions, or in the case of a business, maybe higher profits. But in an academic institution, the conversation usually surrounds what does it mean to be an excellent scholar, or an excellent teacher, an excellent researcher. And what's difficult is that we are so ingrained and trained to think of excellence as research productivity, as publications in certain outlets over other outlets, to think of it as presenting at particular conferences versus other conferences. And so part of the challenge and the struggle is to broaden that view of excellence. Right, so what I think of as an excellent teacher is a teacher who can speak to my experiences. Right, that's a different, not only deliver the material and the content of the course, but can do so in a way that connects with all the students. So that's how I would define an excellent teacher, but that's not how many faculty handbooks, that's not how many, if you look at policy manuals, that's not how excellence is defined. And I think that's the first thing we need to do, is change the definition of excellence and push on department chairs, push on your colleagues to really think about how they're defining that. And then not only think about it, but codify it, put it into words, put it into the policy. Another struggle, but I really love Markus's work, and I'm gonna go there and use some of those climate surveys. But there can be what I call death by 1,000 surveys and reports. And I think Selena, you experienced this. It's this analysis paralysis that, okay, we have a climate issue, let's study it. And at the end of the year, let's do a report. But why are we doing that? We know that there's bad climate. We know that there's racial inequity. We know it's there. So I'm always saying, well, let's just skip that part. Let's skip that part, assume it's there, and let's go to action. Unless the survey is kind of being more specific about the different areas or different interventions that can be done, I would say skip the surveys. So push on, again, if you see your department going in that direction, wanting to do an analysis and wanting to take a year, I would advise you to try to, push that along and see if you can do that. so I think the next 2 points are intertwined and remind me a lot of what Selena was talking about and Ruby, is that there's resistance to change if it means self-sacrifice, right? So, I always use the metaphor of having space at a table. And if there's 5 chairs and we want to diversify that table, someone's going to have to lose their seat. And that might mean you, or, another person, might, and so they like the idea of diversity, but they don't like the idea of giving up their seat. And that's the conversation that needs to happen. It needs to happen explicitly. Like, hey, we're going to have, if you're really committed to diversity, you also have to be committed to giving up your seat. You here in this faculty meeting, you have to give up your seat on that committee so that we can diversify it. And that's when you'll get change, but you have to have that commitment to self-sacrifice. Now, the biggest roadblock or issue I would say that I face in doing this work is the issue of sharing the load. So as part of my onboarding process at DePaul, I talked to, dozens and dozens of people on campus through Zoom. And, it was always the same handful, really 2 handfuls of people doing the diversity work for the entire university. So how do we share that load? Because there's too much work to be placed in the hands of too few people. And so I like the idea of allyship, and that was discussed. Well, I guess the term was co-conspirator. I like that term better. This idea that you're going to not only recognize the issues and so there's some people consider themselves allies because they agree with your stance, right? They say, yes, I can see that that's a bad thing, or I can see that this is a problem. But what we need are allies who are actually going to take on the burden, right? Who are going to put themselves out there, who are going to advocate, who are going to insist, right? Insist that certain things happen, and who are going to be there consistently. Right, and so a lot of times you have allies that are there and then they're not there, and but you really need to try to build this coalition of people who are going to see things from beginning to end, and who will be there consistently. And so for many of you who are watching this webinar, what I would challenge you to do is think about how, not only how you can be a better ally, but how you can build a coalition of allies within your department. And if you're a graduate student, it might start with the graduate students. And then you might be able to get a couple faculty members involved. And, and so it can grow, it can grow in that way, but taking this idea seriously, that it's not simply thinking, and this performative kind of allyship, but really putting yourselves out there. And I must say though, it is so hard when you are a graduate student and you don't have power. And so part of, I think, allyship is trying to find those people who do have power, and and talking to them about how they can become an ally, how they can join in what you're trying to do, right? Because it's again, if you're being gaslighted, as Ruby talked about, or dismissed, it's very difficult to create change. The second takeaway or piece of advice is that to create lasting change, I really think you have to change policies, right? So we're in a moment now where I think people are, we're having a lot of conversations. There's this zeitgeist of, hey, let's really do something, but we can't count on that continuing, right? So things change, people get distracted by other events, other issues. And so you can't rely on people's goodwill, even when you have it. You need to translate that goodwill into something concrete. So for example, right now, there's conversations happening surrounding whether or not to use GREs for admission to graduate school. Knowing that, in Kennedy's, language, using the GRE is a racist policy in the sense that it produces racial inequity, right? So if we think of that as creating racial inequity, and we know that racial equity would be to either do holistic review or, weighting the GRE lower or even not using it all, then that would lead to equity. And so, but it's not just a discussion that happens now. We need to put it into the department policy for years going forward, that this is something we commit to in writing, not only this year, but next year and the year after and the year after, right? And so a piece of advice is, if your department chair is saying, okay, we'll do this, a response is, okay, how can we put that in writing? How can we put that into our guidebook, right? So push on changing policies. And then the last piece of advice is that if you're in a committee, and we love committees in academia, and committees will do a lot of talking, they work very hard, they often produce very nice reports, but what committees should be focusing on is establishing what are called SMART goals. And I know, this is something a lot of you have heard of, but these are goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time dependent. So it could be something like, we are going to change our GRE policy this year and have the policy rewritten by June 1st, right? And then it's specific, it's measurable in the sense that, okay, did it actually happen? You can look at the graduate student admissions. It's attainable, so, well, it depends. If it's, by attainable, it has to be something that's within the purview of the department. If it's something that the department can't change and it's a university policy, well, then that might not be a SMART goal. All right, so thinking about what can be changed within a specific purview. And then relevant, and this is really, I think, important when we're talking about DEI work, because sometimes you'll have committees who are doing things to serve a population of people, and that population doesn't want that thing, right? I was on a committee or a group who wanted to help migrant workers who were out in the field and it was smoky, and they thought, okay, let's give them teas. Because this is, there was a rationale behind it, but my question is that what the group wants? Did someone check in with them? And so always keeping that in mind, if you're a department chair or departmental committees, speak to the students, bring the students in, have the students be the ones who are determining what the goals are, or whoever the impacted group is, and then come up with how you can meet those goals. So be concrete. If you're doing any of this work, again, specific, and really try to change policies so that you're moving the needle and that your work isn't just talk. So that's the advice I have. And again, just coming from someone who does this on a daily basis. And we can now move to our Q&A, which I guess I'm also moderating. So let me stop sharing my screen. All right, so there were some questions that came in that were directed towards the group as a whole that I thought might be good to answer first. So if our panel can unmute, that would be cool. So one question is, to what extent are any of you compensated for the DEI work that you do for your department or university, either in terms of teaching load reductions or actual money?
Zero.
Markus.
Zero.
Zero.
Same.
Well, for being like associate chair for diversity initiatives, we would get a course release. Yeah. I can't think of anything where there was any kind of monetary compensation.
In Rubi, do the graduate students get any sort of stipend or?
Well, right, we have our TA-ship or GA-ship, but as far as what I'm doing inside my organizations or in other organizations, I'm not getting compensated.
We recently, sorry, Cindy, we recently introduced awards, and I think Michigan has that already, service awards for graduate students who are particularly active in promoting DEI in the department. And they're now awards that come with a financial reward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in our department, I was just thinking about this, that we have graduate students who part of their support, for example, would be helping to manage the subject pool. And so it's not unheard of that for graduate students, I think, to have part of their their stipend be based on work that isn't simply research or teaching. And I think one of the things that we could, as a field, as psychology departments consider is, well, if we really are serious, then maybe we should be creating positions, funded positions, for people who are doing this work.
Yeah, so that happens at Michigan with, they call it GSSA, which is a graduate student, I think it's staff position, but it's it's called the Student Ally for Diversity. So it comes to the graduate school, and it supports a student for summer funding who works with the whatever faculty member is in charge of diversity initiatives for that department. And so that person gets the summer position, summer salary, the graduate student, for their role in enacting and supporting the department's diversity initiatives. So that is something that's available. That's money for students.
Yeah. Yeah, and I should say, I mean, when I was at UC Davis, my role there was, it was a 50% administrative role. So I did get a 2-course reduction and a stipend, but it was structured in a way that allowed for that. But from what I hear, it's not necessarily a common thing. And what's more common seems to be a small group of people doing, 90% of the work and not getting compensated for it. Or worse,
at the higher levels, like for example, the associate dean at the college level for a DEI has the same compensation as as the associate dean for faculty or the associate dean for undergraduate education. They all get course releases and they all get some form of extra administrative money, right? But it's good that it's the same for each one of the associate deans. It's not like lesser for the one who's doing DEI. And I think that's important. It has to be equal work. I mean, equally respected and equally compensated.
Mm-hmm.
I think at a faculty level, it's harder though. So if you have a 100% faculty appointment, it just goes into our service responsibilities.
Mm.
And it perhaps is, so there's this term that I learned of last year or a couple of years ago, exploitation, like passion exploitation.
Oh.
And so there's just, well, you're choosing to do that. And since you probably do it anyway, so why would we compensate you for that?
Yeah, I mean, and I actually think it's harder work, right? So I have, at DePaul, we have diversity advocates who are they may be the lone voice speaking up in a department meeting and having to deal with, pushback and it's hard work. It's and emotional work for a lot of people. And I think in that sense, it's I think even more important to compensate it and recognize the work that goes into it. So looking at, because I know that panelists can also see the Q&A. So I talked a little about how you change colleagues or the idea of trying to change colleagues' minds about the importance of DEI. Do any of you guys have tips or things that have worked for you in terms of having those discussions and working with, I guess, resistance?
Well, I can talk a little bit. There's a question at the top of the Q&A that's similar to what you're asking. Asking, like, there are some people who might think that diversity means letting in these underqualified candidates, right? And we refer to that as the diversity excellence trade-off that some people perceive, So when you start talking about diversity, the answer or the response can be, like, well, we have to keep up excellence. We have to get good people. And it implies somehow that if you have diverse people, they're not the best, and that there's just this strange perception of a trade-off there. And I found in some work that I did with the advanced program that it's more prevalent than you think, that belief, and that it's one of the hardest ones to move, I think. So, after, exposing people to, say, some kind of workshop, they may still hold that belief afterward, even though other DEI related beliefs have changed. So it's a very difficult one. But as far as I guess I'm good at pointing out the problem. I don't know all the solutions for it, except to say that if it becomes part of the way that your, whatever, your department or your unit or your program is evaluated as how well you're doing on DEI, then people start to think it's more important. So they feel like they have to then do something about it. So making it part of, make people accountable for it and making it part of how you might get access to resources is something that can move that perception.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that, as social psychologists, personality psychologists, we have, and I was thinking about Markus's work, like, and I need to read the, so there are things we can do, right? So, and maybe linking it to the work in the field. So one of the things I've been trying to do is think about people's identity and how, and expanding it. So again, like this idea of, I'm a faculty member, I'm a professor, and what does that mean? And trying to, appeal to the idea that people want to be good at their job. They want to feel confident, right? That's a kind of a universal need. And so suggesting that, well, to really do your job well, or to really be, as an institution, here's who we are, and here's what our faculty, so just trying to really change how people see themselves with the hope that that will then change their actions. It's like, because we want our actions to be in line with our identities and our self-views. That's a long-term process. I like the idea of changing policies as a short-term process, but that's kind of one way I link it to my research, is thinking about identities and people's self-concept, and can we change that so that they can absorb the DEI stuff more readily.
So building off of what you said, Cindy, it made me think of intersectionality. So one approach would be to try to have a superordinate categorization or develop a superordinate identity with the organization and its DEI principles. Another might be to really, because we have multiple identities, right? And some of those may experience privilege and some of those may experience oppression. And so if that's the case, depending on with whom you're talking, trying to get them to make a different identity salient, maybe the oppressed identity salient, so that they could try to understand what that experience is like, and that it doesn't make them less of a person or less excellent.
Yes, great point.
I think things can change when people have a different perception of what it means to be a faculty member and what our mission actually is. I mean, nowadays, more and more universities ask job applicants to hand in 3 statements: a research statement, a teaching statement, and a diversity statement. And in the diversity statement, the candidate has to be able to explain what they are contributing to the diversity efforts of the department. And that is incredibly important, and not any less important than activities that are described in the other 2 statements. Because we do have a mission, and we want to be there for all our students, and not just for some of our students. We want to help students from all backgrounds succeed in college. And if everybody is white and mostly male, we're not going to achieve that goal. So I think it is incredibly important. I mean, if you're in a department and there is no diversity whatsoever, you're not going to attract graduate students from diverse groups. And if they do come, they're more likely to drop out. So I think that old-fashioned view where a faculty member's sole purpose is to produce research and publish that in high-impact journals, I think we have moved on. That's only one of our missions as faculty members.
Yep, I definitely agree, and it's and so I think it goes to how we train our graduate students, right? So the students who are graduate students now are going to be, the next wave of faculty members, and so I like the idea of, what kinds of discussions are you having in your lab? Right. So are your lab meetings just focused on research, or are you having discussions about what, as you think about careers, like what are the important values that you bring to it? And so I think that's something that we could all do now or take home is, how can we expand the discussion so that this model, even if you ascribe to the model, the traditional model, at least you are aware that it's just one model, right? And that there's other ways of doing things. I think even that would be an improvement. So let me go to another question. So there were people were wondering about the executive order and how it's impacted your institution and your work specifically. Has the University of Wisconsin made any changes, Markus?
Not that I know of. Thanks for asking the question. I mean, we have a training that all undergraduates, incoming undergraduates participate in. So that's administered to 8,000 new students every year. As far as I know, that executive order has not affected the training. It usually happens over the summer, the orientation weekend for the students. So it happened in August already. And I think it is different in the sense that it doesn't uniquely focus on implicit bias. Implicit bias is one of the topics that's being discussed, but many other topics are discussed as well, including what I call concrete behavioral advice. And I was very happy about what Rubi presented. I think many of these workshops just sort of say, hey, you're implicitly biased, now go out and be less biased. I think we should give people the tools so that they can be inclusive and actually say, hey, here are a number of behaviors. Why don't you abstain from doing those? And why don't you engage in more of these behaviors? And because actually a substantial proportion of individuals does want to contribute to a positive climate on campus. And I think we've just seen that after George Floyd, the vast support among students for Black Lives Matter and racial equity issues. So I think the secret here was not uniquely focused on bias. I think it does touch upon white fragility and difficulties talking about race, but I don't think you can describe that training as something that makes white people feel guilty about being white. And therefore, we did not run into issues.
And Denise, I know that Michigan issued a statement.
Yeah, so we, our leadership did issue a statement that basically re-emphasized that we will stick to our mission and the stated values that we had around DEI and our efforts to support that at our institution. So it was very good to have a strong confirmation of that from the leadership. Of course, they're beholden to, as a federal contractor to review things. So that I imagine that they will have to take a look at these things, but they wanted us to know that we would continue to do what we're doing. So, but it is, very much a point of concern, and because it talks about certain, I forget what they call them, but these concepts that we can't talk about. For example, that any notion that the United States is inherently racist or implicitly biased is something we're not supposed to discuss. And it's sort of a large part of what a lot of social psychology is has discovered, is that there are these biases, and how do you deal with that? So I think time will just tell. I mean, it's new; we have to figure it out. But it's disheartening that some universities did stop, like the University of Iowa, did stop their diversity programs. I guess to review, but I'm not sure what the outcome of that review will be.
Yeah, I mean, I know UC Davis came out with a kind of strong statement of that the work will go on. I think it's easier for larger institutions to kind of send those messages, but it's something to think about, right? So that when we think about, part of the executive order is this idea of meritocracy and how we shouldn't imply that meritocracy concepts or ideology are necessarily I don't know what the order exactly says, but if it's clear that, you know, certain, yeah. So anyway, I like the idea of being thoughtful, of course, but I think the work we're doing is really important, and it is, there's this climate of, it has a chilling effect, and that's what I'm worried about, and creating a lack of confidence in people who, we have, departments who are really excited, thinking, oh, do we have to stop? And so having an institutional message that says, okay, we're gonna, hold the course for now, I think is really good. Yeah, time will tell. So I think that's how many institutions are dealing with it, just waiting and analyzing and just seeing where things go with it. All right, so I'm pulling up. So we have, I think we have about 5 minutes left. Unless I'm wrong, maybe someone from SPSP can tell me how long we have. But I'm looking at the list of questions that came in earlier before this started, and I'm trying to pick one. All right. So how about this? One question is, well, how do we keep the momentum going? Right. So, I've experienced that since the George Floyd murder, and just the discussions about anti-racism, discussions about climate inclusion. How do we keep the momentum going? How do we translate this into action? And so that was one of the questions that came in. If anyone wants to try tackling that.
I think accountability is one of the key issues. People have to be held accountable. For instance, one simple practice that we had the Climate and Diversity Committee in the department, and they were doing their stuff, but at some point we said, okay, now once a year, the chair of that department does a report to the faculty, and they line out what they have done. And then the second thing, and I think Denise already responded to that, our graduate school, the graduate programs in the different departments now get evaluated. And on a whole series of criteria, for instance, do you have an explicit recruitment plan for undergraduates, for underrepresented students, for underrepresented groups? Do you have a specific plan? And if yes, please share that with the committee. And if you don't have a plan, that's sort of check, not good. And then there are a whole bunch of other criteria. And then you get rated on a 5-point scale, and that grade influences how many fellowships you do get from the university. Every department gets a certain number of graduate fellowships. But if you, with regard to women, retention, underrepresented groups, recruitment plan, active outreach to colleges with a large percentage of students from underrepresented groups, then you are not getting as many fellowships. So to some extent, I think that accountability, having to report at regular basis, and then having the carrot there does help to keep the momentum going.
Yeah, I think that both Rubi and Selena had really good, things to say about that, in terms of, like, Rubi talking about follow-up, what happened if, whatever, months later, years later, or whatever, from a conversation and action that people were trying to take. And Selena talked a lot about things you can do, like to institute change in your classes and your coursework. And this is things that everybody can do, right? To try to think about what are ways that DEI is reflected in my syllabus, and in the way I talk about contributions of, that people from different groups have made to the content of this course. So yeah, I think sort of just taking a different stance in the way we present our work and think about our work by keeping these DEI goals in mind all the time can be really helpful.
I think for me, Cindy, your talk about allies and the importance of building an ally network, because sometimes I'm just tired, sometimes, like, share the work, right? So so real allies, not just performative allies or virtue signaling allies, but allies who are gonna give space when I want it and need it, and then take up that space when I need a break.
Yeah, and I think, you know, sometimes just in any kind of, you know, work where there's a, you know, there's these goals that are lofty and they're big and they'll take time. I think sometimes you need these small wins along the way. And, you know, looking at low-hanging fruit, which I don't really like that because these are important things too. But I think it's one way to build momentum is showing people that, hey, we can, you know, showing that there is progress, that we have these wins and made these changes, and that and eventually we're going to get to the big, you know, the big change that we want. But kind of thinking strategically about what are the kind of, you know, small things we can do now. What are our long-term goals, and making sure you have both, so that there's this kind of continued sense of, okay, we're accomplishing, we're doing things, we're having these wins, and it builds again the sense of confidence that, hey, we're doing something. So I think that's important too, is just being kind of in your committee strategic about how you know, plan what you're going to do. All right, so we're at time, and I know that some people have questions about, so this is being recorded, and so if, I'm not sure how, but SPSB will somehow make this available, I believe, and so you can, because I know that on the slides, there was a lot of information and links, and so that will all be in the recording, and thank you all for participating in the panel and taking your time on a Friday afternoon for this uncompensated work, but it's for our field, all right? And it shows how much we love SPSB. So hopefully everyone who's watching can go back to their departments, schools, colleges, and, you know, make the whatever differences you can do there, and that we'll continue to have these discussions.